So when we installed these drive shafts before, they were quite comically too short because we'd neglected to do anything about it when we widened the track of the car by pushing those trailing arms further out to get a little bit more clearance here and there, which has caused some other problems. But one in particular is our drive shafts are far too short, even on the side that is completely standard. On this side, we took the power takeoff that goes back to the Haldex Quattro system. We took that off, got rid of it, the centre diff that is, and we now need a much longer drive shaft. So we have two of these, which we can bolt in and weld back up to make one. Now you might think that is a very suspect way to make a drive shaft, and you'd be 100% correct, because we don't have anything we can sleeve the inside with, and we don't have anything we can sleeve the outside with as it stands. The plan is to make these up for size and then get some actual proper ones made up with the correct length, the correct spline, all one piece, and it will be lovely. But in the meantime, while we don't have any stock to turn down or sleeve over the top with, we're just going to make it out of these. But that still does give us a couple of problems, because we don't want a banana shaft, which is bent like this, whipping around and destroying everything. Even for just a test that we'll get from here to the end of the drive and back, and then off the trailer into the IVA, we need something that is not going to shake the whole car to bits, and crucially will pass the IVA, and that means we need a fixture to hold two pieces of pipe in alignment. So this is the fixture that we've made. It is very technically a piece of angle iron with some stubs welded on, and that's all we really need, at least for the accuracy that we need for this. We've zip tied this one in so we can still turn it around, and we've beveled the end of this. We haven't beveled the end of this one as yet. We'll do that beforehand. We had this one in to bevel it before, and basically we'll put a clamp on here that will actually hold it in better than just a retaining zip tie, and that should hold these dead in line. We can validate that with a nice straight edge between the two as well on the top, so we can make sure it's not bowing down where we're pushing it down into the bottom. But this piece of angle iron is apparently pretty straight according to what we've managed to measure. So the only thing we need to do now is weld these two up, join them, and then see if they fit in the car. The first thing that we need to do before that is make sure that we have these at the actual right length. We've obviously beveled this one, but this one needs cutting down, because where these currently sit in the car, there is a little bit of overlap. And although the inner drive shaft does compress slightly, and we do need to have this compressed slightly, we don't want exactly the right length, we need a little bit of compression in it, so that as the drive shaft moves up and down with the wheel, it has a little bit of extension just to go out as the wheel goes up and of course down. So we need to shorten this by, I think we wrote it on this one. It's possible we didn't. We might have put it on this one, which would be a little bit dumb. Nope. I've just been really smart and I've managed to wipe the line off. Go me. So we might have to remeasure those, remount this up and start again, but we will weld this in a minute once we've checked the dimensions. So we've got both ends of these beveled now, cut them down so that they are a little bit overlapping in the car, but obviously that gives us a little bit of compression on this joint, which is what we want for the movement I'm mentioning before. And then we've rigged it up into this little fixture that holds it in place with an extra one on the top that just pinches it down. This is just some scrap angle iron, pinching it together and keeping it nicely aligned. So this now just needs, make sure that there is nothing binding, and we can start welding. Now this is only tacked together at the moment. We've got 6 approximately opposite welds in. 1, because we want to make sure that it's straight by putting it in the car and spinning it around, and 2, we want to put it in the car and make sure it's not still too long, or in fact too short. So we've just flapped these ones down, but now we can install this in the car, and I've got to say, this feels extremely long. Like, holding this and looking at the back of the car, I can't help but think that we've made a mistake somewhere and that this is far too long. But we all looked at this bolted up and it was right. And we didn't add any metal between there and here and welding it, so I have to assume that this is actually the right length. Well, that's all installed. Chris is just turning this around now, and we've clamped a little reference piece of material that's just barely touching on the drive shaft on the right hand side, you can see just clamped down in the corner. And if we have a look right down over the top, we can see how much deviance we actually have. So we've just done a quick test with some sheets of aluminium and some very improvised feeler gauges, and we think we are within about 0.5 millimetre of centre, which is pretty good considering the lineup that we had to use and the tools and the fixing jig that we kind of cobbled together in order to make it work. So I'm pretty happy. This will certainly be enough to use as a reference drive shaft, if not one that I particularly want to do 100 miles an hour on. Now all we need to do is make the other one. So one drive shaft, not too bad. We could get the pieces alongside one another and align them to work out how much we need to put in. This one, because it's so short and has the CVs on each end, we can't actually get the other shaft in place alongside and get an accurate measurement. So before we took this one out, we measured the distance that we need from the back of this flange onto the gearbox flange, and it's about 30 mil that we need to install, and that will still compress this enough so it should all work. Now the difficult part is going to be transferring that measurement across. As I say, obviously we've already cut this end down, but if we measure from a common point, which is the little ridge here before the shoulder where the CV boot sits, we should be able to add in 30 mil from here and then cut the right amount back from this end to get the length that we actually need. And I know that sounds a little bit convoluted, but stick with me. So we're going to measure this as 142 mil to the end of the shoulder where this CV boot goes on. So we need to make this 172 approximately to within a couple of mil. There is plenty of freedom in that in order to take up the gap that we need. So we take this CV boot off because we don't need this end anymore. We can just unclip it, measure back and make sure that we get this right. And you're probably not going to see much of us doing that because it's going to involve a lot of head scratching, and you don't want to see us just getting more and more covered as we desperately rub our hands into our temples trying to work this out whilst covered in grease. Well, that was a lot harder to weld than the other one because these pieces are so much shorter. We had to cut big chunks out of our guide just to get them to fit because these axles actually swage out ever so slightly at the end, which is a little bit annoying. But we've managed to get them in. We've got 5 really big welds in there, and we dug down massively in compared to the other one, so the welds are much closer to the center, and we can build them up if we really want to at a later date. But for now, again, for a dimensional test fit, this is absolutely perfect. Now we're going to see if we've got any more or less run out than in the other one. Given this is across a much shorter length, I would hope we have less run out, because if we have more run out or the same run out as the other one on a shorter length, that means this one is more out of line than the driver's side drive shaft that we did before, and we've got worse with experience.
Well, the drive shafts are now in, and this looks really bad right now. So we've had to pull the hub quite far out of the car because these VW drive shafts, they've got like a big cup at the end that you've got to press in and then put into the end, into the side of the differential. And to make that fit, we didn't have quite enough spring in the CV joint, so we've moved our wheel hubs out quite a lot to make that clearance happen. Now, we haven't moved them back in yet, which gives us this comedy gold, like the tyre is way too far out of the car and pointing inwards. But just as an illustration of how flexible the geometry is on this thing, I think that's a pretty interesting visual. So now we can get these kind of back in the right place, and crucially, with the drive shafts in, the bearings in, all of our arms on, we can put it on the floor and do, I wouldn't want to call it a proper alignment, but we can actually kind of eyeball and try and get this all lined up properly. And here we are with a very basic, quite crude alignment rig. We've taken a piece of box section that we had in the garage, stuck it on some axle stands parallel to the body. And the rough idea here is if we assume that this is straight, it probably isn't, but if we assume this is straight, we can measure the distance from it to the wheel face at the front and back, do a little bit of trigonometry and figure out our toe angles. From there, we can also put another bar up the wheel and use our little angle measurer thing that we have to measure the camber. And finally, we can, using some other bits and pieces, measure where it is in and out relative to the car. This has all worked out fairly well. As near as we can tell, the hubs, the centres of the wheels, are in the same places on both sides, so it's quite symmetrical. We've ended up with about 1.5, 2-ish degrees of negative camber, both sides, which is a pretty happy number. This wheel is pointing more or less directly down the car, so there's no toe. And on the other side, because the trailing arm is actually mounted slightly differently, the trailing arm's mounted inwards on the other side, we've ended up with a bit of toe in. So although the wheels are in the same place, the front edge is a bit in. But apart from that, we're looking pretty good.
Now, in amongst all of this, we have been creeping ever closer to finally finishing off our brake pedal assembly in order to push that little brake switch with a lever that sits on the side of the brake pedal. And frankly, in there is an absolute nightmare to film, to see, and basically Chris has to just fall through the floor in order to get in to install it and actually take any measurements to make sure that this is as close as we can possibly get to right, both at rest and at full travel on the pedal. And this is how bad this has been. This is 9 different prototypes, obviously starting pretty blocky just to try and get some areas, and I think the last probably 3 or 4 have been fractionally different versions. I mean, these are all so similar that to look at them is almost impossible to tell the difference between them. This one is version 10, which is so hot off the press, I haven't even taken off the supports yet. So this will go onto the pedal, and finally, this will sit in the right place, we hope, because obviously we haven't tested this because I've only taken that off. But based on all of the other testing we did today, which I think we've done 3 different prints across the course of this afternoon and evening, the bottom edge will sit up against the pin in that little switch, and then as the brake pedal is pushed, it rises up towards the top. And basically getting it to rise up to the top, still be in contact, and not be impeded by the size of this paddle when the accelerator goes down is what has taken at least 4 of these iterations. It's been an absolute nightmare, but we now have one that will finally work and a little backing plate. So this is going to go on the other side, and basically this will just bolt through once we buy some cap head bolts to go in. Some little M6 cap heads will go through and pin this onto the brake pedal. So this will push down like that. I'll do it this way as well so you can see. Basically the brake pedal sits in there, pushes down, and the pin sits like that and then rotates around and touches the top and bottom of the paddle. And as I say, that has taken probably about 3 weeks all told of actual work, day in, not quite day in, day out, but iterations going through with other things we've been printing, trying to get this in place. And it's been horrendous. It's been at least 3 different weekends with Chris over here working on the car and trying to get this right, because I, thanks to a few too many pies, cannot fit into the footwell low enough down to see what's going on, which is a real nightmare because it means I can't actually do much of the prototyping on this when he's not here. I can make it, print it, but then I have to wait for him to actually get a good look at how it's doing. So the last job for tonight is to test that one, throw a couple of bolts through and see how it looks. Now the problem with this, having just put the car back on the ground, is even Chris can no longer fit with his legs down through the floor, so he's having to reach in the same as me. But at least he can get a better idea of what it was like the last time he was under there this afternoon, and actually check to make sure that it will do what we need. And with that success, we are pretty much done for this episode. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like, comment down below, and if you'd like to see more 3D printed parts go into the shop, like this lovely number plate surround, which we might do if there's enough interest, because frankly making this is a bit of a pain in the backside, we may end up doing a limited run of those. Make sure to check out shop.pedalbox.show for other merch like this t-shirt that I'm actually wearing for a change, and you can also support us at patreon.com/pedalboxshow. And don't forget, all of our patrons get an equivalent level of discount to their donation at the shop. So the $10 a month patron gets 10% off at the shop. Thanks very much for watching. Let us know what you think in the comments, and we'll see you next time.